Anishinaabemowin Bemwidood Indigenous cause. Shagiro dem nipissing donjaba. Nimkiwi kwedong indonda aja. Ojibwe Anishinaabemowin kinigish nipissing minwam chiging da. I'm trying to use Ojibwe as much as I can because it is my indigenous language which holds my worldview. Chief Justice Lamar says, in the Aboriginal tradition, societal practices and customs are passed from one generation to the next by means of oral description and actual demonstration. Batiste says that Aboriginal languages is beyond a doubt the most integral knowledge that contains the traditions and customs. So as we are learning about critical Indigenous pedagogies, I thought I should at least attempt to discuss this in my Indigenous language, how it should be explored. Batiste also says Aboriginal languages generate a strong and direct way of understanding the legacy of tribal knowledge. MacGyver also says second language learning, even to the level of basic proficiency, can provide a form of cultural immersion that accelerates and enhances the enculturation process and allows for more direct and meaningful insights of core values, traditions, and beliefs. In other words, learning a language is essentially a way of getting intimate with the soul of a culture. Ga'a kosh ganigi an nagiwi gikendan io Anishinaabemowin, punen nagiwi neta Anishinaabemo. In my language journey, nagidaya wakewe kanoma gewat jineta Anishinaabemowin. Gichin Pakan Ojibwe Winan, each dialect is a representation of the community's worldview. Batiski Win Mawigonan, in our language holds our worldview. But Anin Gaye Gigi Kinoma Dion, Kinapakan Eo Kinoma Gang. Does that change our worldview? Gishbin Kinoma Dion Ojibwe Win, do I learn the worldview of my people or do I learn a particular community's worldview? Does the various Ojibwe I learn shape my own worldview because I have learned from different places? Gonna butch. This is a question I would like to explore. This is important to me because of the various language influences I've had from important people in my life. Nagi Kanoma di Chiging, Nipissing, Odawa, Minnesota Nita Anishinaabemowin, Gan Gayaba Nita Ojibwe Mosoan. Geshkwe Ojibwe Mwin Kinomo Wawad, U Nimishomis Ban Mina Nokomis, Enjabawa and Chiging, Nimishomis Saban Nita Anishinaabemowin, Mina Nokomis Neta Anishinaabemowin, Mina Mino Bamadzawad. Ni Mine Gonanik, ni Winzawinonan, ni Mino and Shimek, Shime Echo Eshnakazut, im Squimingwakwe, ni Shime Dakota Eshnakazut, Nimkin Guanquat. Anishinaabemowin Bemwidood, Indigenous. Ni Bapa Gi Zegeze, Ozam, Ojibwe is a dying language. What kind of a burden is that to put on a 5-year-old's shoulders? In 1990, the Assembly of First Nations surveyed 151 First Nations communities and found that a little over 1/3 of those communities could classify their language as flourishing, which is 80% are fluent speakers. 1/4 of those communities had declining speaker population. 10% of young children were reportedly fluent, which categorized the other communities as critical or endangered language-wise. Ga'ajo knomuit iunamama eshnakaza benabakwe. Gawin Chiging Enjabat, Gawin Neta Ojibwe Mosawat, Gawin Namama Minwan the Bapa, Pish Kinigi Yan Nagiwi Kendamak, Kinapakan Gawe Westiak, Minwa could count to in good walk, Anishinaabemowin. Ozamgi Mazina Gas Sanke, she and my grandparents were always part of my Chiging teachers. They taught me words from their dialect/worldview that were true to them and not true to other places. Chiging Ojibwe is the seeds of my language base. Nipsing ga kanomwit o Muriel Sawyer eshnakazat. Ga nita kanomaget. Nagi kikenda wigoban jinita Anishinaabemowin, and thought of a way to get me there. Kachin nagi kanomawik eo Anishinaabemowin. She developed my language base the most in my language development because she had taught me how the language works. So whenever I learn new things, I always compare it to what I learned from Muriel in my Nipissing dialect. It was from high school that I committed myself to being an Ojibwe language teacher. Gaja yan iu high school, Nagija algoma jik noma dian, iu Anishinaabemowin mina nagi knomik o Howard Web Kamagad Eshnakazat. Odawa neta Anishinaabemowin. He taught me a new dialect and some aspects of Ojibwe I will always cherish. It was from here at Algoma that I realized some things about my language development and the effects of dialects. Gawi nipasing nedayan an kidwinan il o gewe minwa newe. Nigi nendaman naban il nipasing gandayan zinan il kidwinan bani ma gi nondoak o giche aya gi objetonan. Pigi kwejmak pakan o giche aya ngiwin moik. He learned from the old speakers, and I learned from the new speakers. After discovering Nipissing had these words in a previous generation, I felt more open to learning multiple dialects and had a better understanding of Ojibwe in general because of it. After finishing at Algoma, I decided the next step for my language development was to finally participate in immersion camps. Isidore Toulouse states that teaching Ojibwe in a school setting is only a band-aid solution to the real problem. To become fluent speaker of Ojibwe, you must be in an immersion setting. After a few years, I decided to attend Ojibwe Motarada. Nizege egon jijayan Ojibwe Motading, ozam eu neta Ojibwemong, ozam gan neta Ojibwemo soan. This was not the case for Ojibwe Motarada. Nigi kano mawegok, nawach apidash, almost any previous teacher. Muriel Sawyer taught me a great deal, and after 6 years of trying to learn Ojibwe, I was finally learning more Ojibwe. Ponen ne nondan e Ojibwemowin, ponen ne Anishinaabem. Ne bzindma kewe kiche ayak mina ne knomowik, e shkikin ne Brendan Fairbanks. Ponen ne jibige, ne geshkandam ganje neta Anishinaabemo soan. One thing that I've noticed is a lot of language classes are taught in a Western school setting, and we are judged on what the teacher knows and penalized if our answers do not match theirs. In Ojibwe, this is especially colonizing because Ojibwe was not taught in a classroom. Students were not judged on how they spoke, they were not penalized for speaking their home dialect versus the teachers. And it is a representation of trying to teach Ojibwe's worldview through a Western worldview, which is something that Batiste says does not work in Indigenous language revitalization. Language should be taught holistically, where all dialects are accepted means of speaking instead of just one. This, in my mind, would be a sui generis curriculum, like Hampton says, because it would be a curriculum for the people and by the people. It would be for the language revitalization of Indigenous people, and the exception of all dialects would be by the people. I know for myself, I've learned multiple dialects, and I've learned to speak from a combination of worldviews, and I refuse to forget any aspect of the language I learned, because each aspect I've learned is an important part of my language journey. These dialects form my own way of speaking Ojibwe, which I have formed on my language journey as Anishinaabemowin Bemwidood. In the future, I plan on participating in more immersion camps, and until I become at least conversational in Ojibwe. I want to be able to converse with elders in Ojibwe. I want to teach Ojibwe in the future with my own dialect that embodies characteristics of many dialects, but be able to be experienced enough to not limit my students speaking to just my dialect, and welcome students to utilize their own dialect freely. Ahaw, miigwech.
Squash no kid giwi mi gwachu in them jibs in the gork a hall get mi gwach mina in bib ska beat a hall mi gwach.